Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. As you can see, we're in the same room.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. And this week, we're going to talk about the topic of contribution splitting. We are together because we were part of the SMSF masterclass this week, where we looked at the topic of contributions. And one of the areas that piqued a lot of interest, Tim, was around contribution splitting.
Yes.
So we thought we'd just touch on that topic today and go through some of the ins and outs of splitting, and more interestingly, the interplay then as well around unused carry forward concessional contributions, and then the impact around splitting in the context of Div 296 as well. But before we maybe jump into those, some of the things that came out of the masterclass, Tim, I guess around the concept of splitting, and then who's eligible to split to start with.
Yeah, and look, I think it was one of those things that is, it's been around for many years, contribution splitting, but and in the SMSF industry, it doesn't gain a lot of traction or conversation, but it's certainly got a huge part to play, and I think one of the nuances of it is that it's quite specific on what you can and can't split.
Mm-hmm.
So whilst we find lots of ways to define concessional contributions for other purposes or whatever, it's quite specific from a splitting point of view that there are a lot of contributions that you can't split.
Yep.
And so you're ultimately, it is exclusively your voluntary concessional contributions. So whether they be salary sacrifice or personal deductible contributions, that is ultimately it with regards to what you can split. But then also who you can split to. So clearly it's only something that you can do with your spouse. But then there are restrictions based on the age of your spouse. So once you've hit 65, that's it. You can no longer split. But also between preservation age and 65, you have to be able to make a declaration that you have not retired. So you've attained preservation age, but you have not yet retired.
And sometimes we get pulled and torn between those two things, don't we? Where, it'd be nice if they were retired because we could actually get retirement phase assets and access to capital beyond a transition to retirement. But then it actually knocks you out for the ability to actually employ contribution splitting if you want to use that strategy to help manage TBC and potentially for Division 296 and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was that was part of the conversation yesterday, is that what am I better off doing, splitting or retiring? From purposes, but it's obviously a genuine issue, and certainly you don't want to be seeing somebody trying to split in the same year they're trying to access their benefits for account-based pension purposes.
And then this splitting strategy is even further enhanced through that unused carry forward concessional contributions, because it not only provides us with the opportunity to split what might be occurring in this year, but we can go back in time and look at those unused portions in those particular years if we're looking to claim the unused portions at this point in time, where our total superannuation balance threshold is, of course, under the $500,000.
Yeah, and we've spoken about this many times that the vast majority of SMSF members are below that $500,000.
Correct.
It's a significant number there. But importantly, and again, I talked about the nuances before. One of the nuances of the splitting application is that it is that you can split 85% of the concessional contributions, but there's actually 2 points to it. It's 85% of the lesser of 85% of the concessional contributions, or the concessional contribution cap. And so this is where the unused carry forward amount becomes quite important, because the concessional cap, whilst we often talk about it as being $27,500 at the moment, ultimately it's also inclusive of whatever you have carried forward that's been unused from the last 5 years.
Yep, absolutely. And to some extent, we can not only look back, but we can also look forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's part of that whole strategic concept, is that, whilst we don't actively promote the use of contribution reserves, you have the capacity to be able to bring forward, as opposed to carrying forward, bring forward part of next year's contributions for deductibility purposes, and then have the amount reallocated through the tax office system for cap purposes. But by bringing that amount into account, often you can utilize it to potentially utilize or close the gap on that 15% difference between the 85% of the concessional contribution and what your cap would be in a period where you're carrying forward amounts.
Yeah, so from that point of view, really understanding not only the opportunity that sits within the unused carry forward, where you might have a level of abnormal income that appears in a particular year, but then also thinking about, well, yeah, I've got the tax deduction, but if we think about, well, do we want to load up that particular member? So it might be the higher producing income earner in the family that has the much higher balance. That then potentially creates a bigger issue in the future. So therefore, being able to do that 85% split as well across maybe to the spouse that hasn't been working or has a much lower balance is a hugely powerful strategy. So what I would say is don't forget that sort of next step above and beyond just actually taking advantage of the deduction in the unused carry forward regime.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing is that the whole concept of splitting has multiple arms to it. There is the rebalancing element. There is increasing balances for those with lower amounts. So there is an eye on the future with Div 296. But there's also, an eye on the present where, again, if we're talking about particularly somebody that is transitioning to retirement, so they've hit that preservation age, we're all getting closer to 60 being the lock-in preservation age. That whole idea too that we want to make our contributions, get our notice of intention in, then if we potentially want to start a tryst or something like that, that we make sure that we understand that splitting normally happens the year after, but also sometimes can happen in the year of the contribution if you're rolling all your benefits into a retirement phase or into a transition phase.
Absolutely.
Pension.
And I guess finally, you touched on this Division 296, so the $3 million earnings threshold that they're looking to impose additional 15% tax on. Again, contribution splitting has become, I guess, an elevated item in there because it does form part of the adjusted TSB calculation for the purposes of contributions and withdrawals.
Yeah, and look, and I think that we focus a lot on these strategies, post age 55.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about a young couple where there's inequity in their earnings, then we don't have to split 85% of the concessional contributions. We can just split a portion, a smaller portion. So therefore, we can actually start that whole rebalancing process much earlier, and ensure that there's more equity between balances, and potentially less likelihood of encroaching on that $3 million threshold in the future.
Absolutely. Well, these were just some of the items that I guess we had a long chat about in our masterclass. The webinar, or the recording, I should say, of the masterclass is not only available for our members within the platform, but if you're interested in purchasing that masterclass, it was a 3-hour event where we take a look through the lens of our Little Brewers Super Fund and our Malthouse family. So if that's something of interest, you can jump onto our site to be able to purchase that. We'll also be talking in much more detail about some of those Div 296 issues in our upcoming changing face of SMSF as well. Good to see you face to face, mate.
Always a pleasure, Aaron.
All right, look forward to you joining us for our next edition of Feeling Smarter. Bye for now.
See you all.